homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room.
Welcome to the interview room, everybody, on this beautiful Sunday evening. So grateful to have you here. We'll let the music play for just a couple of minutes while we wait for everybody to come in. I see She Junkster. Great to have you here. Glad you caught him out alive. Lori Matthews, thank you. Amy, so great to see you. Bob's 22. Diane Curry, Low 12. We appreciate you. And all of our friends from Australia. Teresa M., so grateful to have you here. Hopefully the hubby's doing great. Angie Brooke, hello. Hello from Kentucky, Mary Hines. We love Kentucky. Hey, Kelly S., great to see you. Zelda, Nicole, Skin with Kelly, Kimberly, happy Sunday. Woohoo! And today's the Marine Corps birthday. All you jarheads out there, Semper Fi.
And thank you for your service. Thank you. And also we want to thank our mods, Miss Sophia, Teresa M., Mimi J2, Maui Girl, Laura Waldy. We love you ladies, and we're so grateful for all you do for us. So thank you.
And tomorrow is Veterans Day. Thank you,
Veterans Day.
All of our veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Reserves, and regulars. Thank you, thank you, thank you for keeping America the way it is. We appreciate you. Because of your service, we can do shows like this house we got going tonight. Navy vets in the house, She Junkster. Thank you. We salute you tonight for tomorrow's celebration. And hopefully all the devil dogs out there are having a happy birthday today. And tonight they're at their birthday parties. That's where you should be. And you can watch TIR on the rerun. Okay. Man, oh man, Karen, we've got a full night. Would you agree?
We do. We do. We are on verdict watch like everybody else for the Delphi Murders Trial. So thank you all for being here with us tonight and tuning in. And Chris and I have, a fair amount to say about it. And we're going to be taking a little bit different perspective on some of the highlights, if you can call them highlights from the trial. So we're going to be having a really interesting discussion, and we're grateful you guys are here with us.
Yeah, we sure are. And Karen has been doing, you've been watching this all week. You've been watching the news and just keeping up on where the testimony has gone. And, the what do you think? Well, let me ask you just off the top of your head, hon. And for those of you who are new to our channel, we ask just one thing, that you subscribe. That's it. That's all you have to do. Hit that subscribe button. And if you would, please share this also with your social media platforms. We're so grateful for that as well. That really helps us. However, at this point, I mean, Karen, this one's been interesting. What's been going on in your mind? And guys and gals in the chat, tell us what's been going on in your minds about this one, because I know there have been some YouTube channels, there's been national news, there's been all kinds of syndicated news and syndicated shows. They're all on top of this thing. They are all on top of this thing. But what say you, Karen?
Well, the jury, as everybody probably knows, has been deliberating for a couple of days. Today is Sunday. They have the day off. The jury has been sequestered this whole time. Tomorrow, they're going to be continuing deliberations. Tomorrow's Monday, as we mentioned, Veterans Day. But they will be deliberating, so they don't have the day off. And we wanted to talk about the case, of course, in the trial, but also some similar cases to this one, just to kind of broaden our perspective on what the jury may be thinking and deciding and, handling right now. But Chris and I are not going to give you our opinion on this case in terms of the verdict. That's for the jury to do. But we do want to bring our collective experience to this. Chris, of course, is a retired homicide detective. Myself as an investigative reporter and a writer, and somebody who got sent to cover these trials many years ago, part of when I worked the crime beat. So I think we do bring another perspective to this. And we're going to talk about a couple of aspects to this case that may not be getting a whole lot of discussion about. But I think while we're all in the wait and see mode, waiting for the jury hasn't deliberated or hasn't rendered the verdict yet. They're deliberating. Just some things to talk about. Yeah, Chris.
And actually, the timing on this is pretty apropos, wouldn't you say, Karen? I just got back. You want to tell everybody where I was?
Well, Chris was giving a homicide training to a group of probably about 200 homicide detectives in the state of North Carolina. He was one of their keynote speakers, and he can tell you a little bit more about it.
I was the last.
I didn't get to go with him, but he was the last speaker. Go ahead.
At the conference, I was the closing speaker, and look what my topic was: anatomy of a child homicide, sexual motivation. And we had about 200 folks there, and it was a beautiful location. I can't tell you where because they like to keep that under their hat for obvious reasons, but because they meet there every once in a while. But long story short, I thought it was really interesting that was the topic. And now we're in a situation where we are all sitting here waiting with what comes next. So, Karen, what is your plan here? Do you want to go by the day-to-day, beat, or what are you thinking, hon?
Let's just do a high-level overview on some of the points that we know that the jury is considering talking about amongst themselves now that they're in deliberations. And then I just can't help, Chris and I've been talking to Chris about this like every day. I'm like, what do you think? This physical evidence and what's there and what's not there. So I think let's talk about that. Just kind of broader brushstrokes on this. A lot of you have been following this day to day. And I know a number of you haven't been as well. You've been just trying to get kind of a daily digest. So I think it is important before we go to that, let's just talk about some of the obvious things. So Chris, remind us of what, and some people may not have heard. I believe it was yesterday, Saturday, the jury in their deliberations, they asked for some information, right? From the
Yes.
court. Okay,
Yes.
tell everybody what they wanted to go back and review.
And ER, I agree with you 1,000% here. I have watched some of her recap, keeping everybody up to date. She's been amazing. You're right. Very good attorney too. Well, so yesterday, they wanted some cell phone video as well as testimony of, one of the witnesses in relationship to his confession, which is, so there's a whole bunch of things going on in my opinion, from the totality of this case. I listened intently to some of the testimony in relationship to, the crime scene, how the victims were found. Now, if you're new to this channel, the reason I travel around the country and give these trainings to homicide investigators is because of my background, real in a nutshell, high-level overview, is criminal behavior analysis in relationship to homicide during the course of SA, and specifically pointed towards pedophilia. So guys who choose children to SA them while murdering them. So this is in my wheelhouse, what we're talking about here. And I have 6 videos that I did before tonight that go back 2 years. And I have to tell you, there are some things that I heard. Let's just take the confessions and put that stuff off to the side. But there were some things in there that I gotta, I'm kind of like, I don't know if it's all there yet, because you and I have both seen, Karen, cases where the government brought a case too early. And then, there's a lot of emotion that's tied into it from an investigative aspect. There was a lot of infighting going on, which has obviously come to the surface now. And so, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, our system, whether we like it or not, is Richard Allen is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. Not just mere doubt, but beyond a reasonable doubt. Is there any question that he did it, is what these jurors now each have to sit back and say to themselves, okay, if we make this decision, is this the right decision? And jurors have the hardest job when they're looking at such horrific, crime scene photos and those kind of things. And then they look over at the families and they look at, that trauma that's taking place there with them. Then they look at the defendant and they go, oh my gosh, yes, no, pull, tug, push. And it's a job of the defense to throw shade on, the prosecution's case. And it's the job of the prosecution to represent and tell the story of the family and those victims, those 2 victims, Libby and Abby. It is the prosecutor's responsibility to do that. But our system has to be balanced. Lady Justice, as we always talk about here, has scales. She has a blindfold. So she can't see. She needs to be balanced. But there's one thing we miss. She's carrying a sword. And that sword of justice has to balance into a position of mercy. Justice and mercy have to be satisfied. They have to be satisfied. So we have a lot going on in this particular trial, but we also have to remember we have a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, and we have 2 counts of murder charged. And the gentleman that the state says did it is on trial. So the question now that the jury is taking back after we've had an opportunity to hear folks that have been there, folks that are reporting on it from, a national level in terms of the news, et cetera. Karen, what are some of the highlights that you picked up over the last, where we had 18, day 18 now?
I think it might be 20 if you're counting deliberation days.
Okay.
I just, my mind, my journalistic mind goes back to the physical evidence. It goes back to the crime scene. It goes back to the unspent shell casing found on the ground. It goes to what physical evidence from the girls, from the victims, is connected to the defendant. That's where my brain takes all this. Yes, we know that the jailhouse confessions and Richard Allen's confessions to his interrogation videos and what he said and told police, his confessions in jail, yes, that has to be weighed too, to your point, Chris. However, knowing how trials go and the task and the assignment of the jury, I go back to that physical evidence. And I'm curious what you guys in chat think too. It's just, we know how these things go. And we're going to be talking about another case that is equally horrible from many, many, many years ago, that when I first heard about the Delphi case, this other case came to mind. It was a Southern California case. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but my brain goes back to physical evidence. Is there DNA connecting the defendant to the victims? What is the totality of the prosecution's case when it comes to that? So that's where I'm at. Chris, where's your homicide detective brain going on all this?
Well, I'll tell you, we've got the most interesting testimony that I heard was from the blood spatter analysis guy. The problem that I had listening to the analysis is they didn't call these guys in early enough. He ended up looking at these photographs 2 years later, or 2024, and this happened so many years ago. And this guy is creating this, testimony. Now, don't misunderstand me. He has, quite the pedigree, to talk about it. But, when you think about how this, unfolds, right? I mean, some of the things for me were, with Libby being, no clothes, Abby being dressed with clothing that belonged to Libby, including her undergarments. Okay. There is a thought process that takes place in these types of problems, in these types of crimes. They're horrific. And you have to step back for a moment as an investigator. And I've always felt from the very beginning that this case was so emotionally charged that when the feds came in the very beginning, one of the profilers, she, that first couple of affidavits that were written up, they had Klein on the hook, they had, Ron Logan on the hook, who ends up passing away. And then they had, this other situation going on with Alan. And then they had this other, wide Odinism, situation. And then we find out that there's a one, expent, discharged bullet, fully intact, okay, in between the two victims. And later on, we get to this place where it's like, okay, first of all, you have to ask yourself, why is the universe on schedule that day? One of the things we always talk about as investigators is you don't ask how. Don't ask how this happened. Okay, because when you do that as an investigator, and I would encourage all of our TRR family here, our tigers, okay, who understand that principle, because what happens is, as investigators start asking, well, how did this happen? Then they start, prescribing medication before they have diagnosed what the illness is, for lack of a better term. And you can never do that. You should never do that, because it reverses the information that you are looking for. And so the principle of investigating information will show you the person. You don't look for the person or people, because at that point, you end up missing exculpatory evidence towards an individual. And so one of the first things that Karen and I were just talking about while we were preparing for this today, I wanted to go back to the affidavit of arrest. Okay.
Now, this is Richard Allen's arrest affidavit.
Yes, Richard
Just so
Allen's
everybody
arrest
knows.
affidavit. And we know here, guys down the hill, no witness saw them at this time. No outgoing communications were found on victim 2's phone after this time. Their bodies were discovered February 14, 2017. The video recovered from victim 2's phone shows victim 1 walking southeast on the bridge, while a male subject wearing a dark jacket and jeans walked behind her. As the male subject approached victim 1 and 2, one of the victims mentions gun. So I have a question for the chat. I haven't seen or heard if that came out in trial. Did that come out in trial? Can somebody tell me, because that's going to help my thought process in
Chris,
chat.
I believe it did. I'm trying to I believe I read it.
Okay.
Because I think I think it was in there. Yeah. Yes, it was mentioned. Okay. Yeah.
So the victim mentions that the perpetrator has a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, that's important to understand, because now when we start looking a little bit deeper at what we call suspectology, then we have to ask ourselves, is this individual who's up on that bridge that day with a gun and ultimately a knife or a box cutter, whatever the weapon's going to be, because they haven't found it, but it's definitely a sharp instrument. That means the universe has to be on schedule so much that the timing of this is in his favor, that he is prepared to perpetrate this crime. So the question is, how did that piece of the puzzle, for me, why does this guy who works at a Walgreens, is that where he works?
CVS.
CVS, yeah,
CVS.
a drugstore. In the photography department. Why does this guy take this to the point where he says, you know what, today is the day. I'm going to get my bullets, or I'm going to get my gun. I'm going to get my box cutter from the store. And I'm going to go to the bridge, not really knowing, or maybe knowing, that two young girls, or maybe even anybody, crime of opportunity, is going to be at the right time, the right place, for the right circumstance. So we have to then step back and say, okay, but why? Why is he doing this? What is going on here with this individual, the suspect, that everything lines up and he knows they're going to be there and he's ready for it that day? Is there a history, right? You want to do what they call a suspectology. Is there a history of him carrying a gun around town? Yes, he may have had a CCW. Yes, we all get that. But does he take it to work? Does he carry his gun to work? Does he not? What are his habit patterns? Those kind of things. And you start unwinding that. And then you have to say, okay, and the police were doing this very early on. Who else is in the circle? Well, we have other evidence of other people. One of them having hundreds of photographs of CP on his phone, on his computers, on his dad's computers. And he even has a catfish account that the victims were communicating with. And he even says, I was there around the same time. Okay. So now you have to go, okay, we have to now separate our main guy, Richard Allen, from this guy. Or is there a nexus? And why is that nexus? What exists between these two, hypothetically? Or maybe there's a third or a fourth. We don't know. Okay. But the evidence that came out was the bodies had been moved, that Libby was leaning up against a tree. Her clothing had been taken off. Abby was wearing it, some of it. They were, a short distance, approximately 20 feet from each other. A bullet is discovered in the middle of the bodies. There was evidence that the children had been moved, potentially post-mortem after death, because when the heart stops, the blood stops, and it settles into the lowest point of the body, and that's called lividity. Okay. And if that body is moved, let's say it was taken away or moved into a different place, then you would not have evidence, or you would have evidence of that on the body, i.e., you would have a lividity stain on the body. Because once your heart stops, that means the blood stops, the blood flow stops. And the only thing that's going to move that blood is gravity. So it would be the body leaning over, the body falling, those kind of things. And in this case, it sounds like, based on the testimony that I was aware of and heard, is Libby is leaning against the tree. She'd probably been cut potentially away from there, meaning she was sitting down, sitting down, and she was probably unclothed. And as she leaned forward after the lacerations to her neck, that blood, because she was still alive, would be flowing. Because, the blood is a liquid, so it moves. And it can tell you a lot. It can tell you about, different things. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting during the testimony recently was there was a question about how the blood got on the tongue of Libby's shoe. So let's kind of hypothesize here for a moment. Karen, let's go over some of the days here where the testimony came out, and let's start with, day 2, right? And go through our list. What do you think?
Sure. I mean, you may want to skip ahead on some of this stuff, but
okay.
On day 2, they reviewed what law enforcement did, the search efforts for the girls. Their bodies were discovered the day after, so it would have been February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2017. Let's just jump ahead. Day 3, the jury saw the graphic crime scene photos. And let me just say, my goodness, I remember reading and hearing reporters and folks who were in the courtroom. I mean, I can't even imagine this poor families. I mean, Libby's family and Abby's family, having to see this. Chris, you've seen this a million times in your career. So heartbreaking, graphic, horrible crime scene videos. Obviously, jury has to see it, but I know it was extremely emotional for those families to have to sit through as well. On day 4, they focused on evidence recovered at the crime scene. And day 5, they talked about the Bridge Guy sighting. They showed autopsy photos and they went over digital forensics. And day 6, they talked about when Alan reported to police after the murders that he was on the trails that day. So his self-reporting to police was that day. And then day 7, they had a gun examiner on the stand, prosecution, and they were talking about that unspent bullet that was found at the crime scene that expert said had been in Alan's gun, which was a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson gun. Do you want to say anything about the bullet, the fact that Richard Allen has a gun that matched the bullet that was found on the ground between the girls? Do you want to say any more about that right now, Topher?
Well, I mean, they had an expert testify that the ejection port, was consistent with, the ejection marks on that bullet. It was a .226 6-hour, and that type of evidence sometimes is very difficult because I just recently had a case where I took a weapon out of evidence and we fired it, and the ejection port kicks everything out to the right, and it showed various different places where those shell casings land, and then you can match the firing pin to the back of a round, but sometimes when you have a full bullet, that means the suspect had to do this. They had to rack the round back or the slide back and then push forward, or just do this and it will fire, it will go forward. And that ejects a round to the right. So that means he's standing closer to one of the, either right between both of the girls, but he's standing to the left of where that bullet landed. And so you have to go in your mind, if you're at the crime scene, you have to kind of imagine, all right, one, why? That's the first question. Why is there an unspent round here, or a round here that hasn't been fired? Number one. And then two, why is it in the position that it's in? And so you have to kind of go back as an investigator and kind of stand there where the suspect said they stood, or where you believe the suspect stood. And I've had a case, you know the case, Rebecca Jensen, where we had a witness who said, I saw the whole murder. I was standing right here and blah, blah, blah. And this guy out there did that. And the guy's name was David Mick. I can say that now because it's been many years. And we went there at the exact same time the witness said it occurred. My partner went on to exactly where she said she was standing. And guess what? You couldn't see anything. And later on, we confronted her with it and said, hey, we did everything that you did. So take us out there and let's do this again, only with you. And of course, things started to unwind pretty rapidly. So the fact that there's a bullet that's there, then we have to say, okay, well, why is it there? And why is he using it to, in the fashion that he did, i.e., why did he rack the bullet out? Why did he rack his gun? What's going on here? Is he using it as, obviously, he's pointing it at the girls? We have evidence that one of them says gun. Right? So that's his control mechanism. That's his control mechanism. Okay. And this is why you have to say, okay, why then does he change his control, his tool, i.e., from a gun to a knife? What's the thought process there? Why is that occurring? Is he using the gun to control each of these girls to take off the clothing aspect of things? Why is Libby unclothed and Abby clothed? And there's a gun involved, yet there's a knife involved. What's going on with the suspect up here? That it's changing. The dynamics are changing within this crime. Okay. So what happens next on some of these other days?
Well, before we do that, I want to get your opinion. The prosecution spent a bit of time with an expert on the Indiana State Police forensic scientist, and they did not find enough DNA material from that unspent round to be able to get a DNA profile. So I thought that part was interesting. They're calling it, obviously, the magic bullet. It's been referred to as that. One of the things that prosecution is saying, alleging, tying Richard Allen to this crime scene. And all I could think about when I was reading back through this was, gosh, what if they used the Bardol method of DNA extraction, which is an offshoot of touch DNA? And gosh, what if they were able to get a DNA profile off that? Chris, what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, Francine's been known to take DNA off of rocks. And I will tell people, I can tell people now, the Cold Case Foundation reached out to Indiana State Police, and they took a pass on assistance. And we had asked if they wanted to discuss some things, and they took a pass, which is fine. Okay. But we were thinking, at the time, this thing is cold. Bridge guy, this is what they had put out. Okay. And you'll see here that he's not, it looks like his hand here, right? It looks like his hand. You can see his hand. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, is this a fanny pack or is this a shirt? I can't remember what it is. If you think about one of the victims saying gun, okay, well, let's go back to the movement and watch this. Now, you can clearly see both of his hands here. So, obviously, the police had clipped this in the beginning. They didn't want to put the whole thing out. So, you see the whole, this is only 13 seconds, I think, of a 46-second video. Okay. And he's walking towards them. And, does he fit? Because everybody's been asking, right, forever, is this, bridge guy, is this Alan? Okay. There's all kinds of different things that we could sit here and go through. But this is what they were going through in the very beginning. They were processing the same stuff we're thinking about here. But one of the most interesting things of this is it's like the universe was on schedule. Everything was lining up. It wasn't, you have to understand the mentality of these guys that go out and they go hunting. Okay. They just don't wake up and say, okay, today's the day. I'm going to get my gun. I'm going to get my box cutter. I'm going to go down to the bridge and I'm going to make sure there are 2 girls there. And I'm going to get them both. Okay. There is so much that goes on with these individuals that, for this to just kind of line up exactly like that day, and then within the community, just kind of blend in for years. Okay. I think, the jury's going to have a difficult task. They're going to have they are going to have a difficult task in front of them. Thoughts, Karen?
Well, we need to talk about the DNA evidence and what the blood spatter expert said as well in court. And that's what I alluded to at the beginning when I was talking about how the girls were found, whether there was his DNA found at the scene. We can go through some of that. That was day 9 from the trial. And that there was a lot of information that came out on that. We're talking about it. Do you want to talk about that right now?
Sure.
We pretty much have already touched on that. I felt what was remarkable was a couple of things. At first, I thought, well, there really wasn't evidence that the girls were essayed. The expert said just because there wasn't physical DNA evidence left on the girls doesn't mean that they weren't essayed. And I get that. Okay, sounds reasonable. But the Richard Allen's DNA of no part at all was found at the crime scene on the girls. I want to be clear. So, Chris, what's your thought about that? I mean, devil's advocate here. Can you get away with murdering 2 people and outdoors, this type of a crime scene, and there wouldn't be any DNA from the killer left behind?
Well, anything is possible. Anything is possible. And that's what makes this case so incredibly frustrating, I think, for people. And I would submit to everybody, right? I think we would all agree that I wouldn't want to be one of those jurors right now, because it is such a horrific case. And, you know, this is such a weighty matter, okay, on them. You know, I've been through cases where, and those of you that know my history, hey, I was involved in a case in San Diego that involved a guy that I said in the very beginning. The district attorney asked me, he said, "Why are you not on board here?" And the case was who killed Stephanie Crow. And the suspect was a gentleman by the name of Richard Tewitt. They made movies out of it. They've written books about it. They have written or done papers about false confessions. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I was sued. The city was sued. I was a part of the city at the time. And what was really happening behind the scenes, the public had no idea what the truth was. And one of the DAs, like I said, Paul Finkst, came to me and he said, "Okay, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, Paul," I said, "the most important witness has never been interviewed." Now, you have to understand that Richard Tewitt at the time was a schizophrenic. The guy literally was like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. And I said, the witness that hasn't been interviewed was the dog. And he looked at me and started to laugh, and he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Paul, think about it. The mother, the father, the brother, the victim, the grandmother, and a dog. All doors and windows locked in the house, etc. How's this guy get in the house, spend 15 minutes with a dog in a wool sweatshirt, a sweater, and has no dog hair on him and hiding from 6 people? How does that happen? Long story short, fast forward, not guilty. They put him on trial. And during the interview, one of the interviews, this detective asked him, he says, "Well, if you tell me you were in the house, things will be okay." And he looked at him and said, "Well, I wasn't in the house, but can I have a bologna sandwich?" Literally, quote unquote. And so when we see stuff where you just go, wait a minute, is it possible that he's our guy? Absolutely, 100%. But I like to be that guy that says 100%, this is the guy. That's him.
And you're not saying that, to be clear.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it yet. Okay. That's the state's job. But it would be my job as an investigator to present all of the evidence, unbiased, exculpatory, plus or minus, it doesn't matter. It's the investigator's responsibility to the Constitution of the United States and to their state, wherever they work, to put all of the evidence in front of a jury, i.e., the defense and the prosecution, the pluses and the minuses. And that's what I tried to do. That's what I still try to do. And, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But sometimes you have to wait. You have to wait. And you retire and you leave. And then you hear, 30 years later, they got the guy. And justice and mercy and the sword are pulled out, but the scales are balanced. So I think there's a tremendous amount of circumstantial evidence. There's little physical evidence on this case. What do you say, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's a lot here. It felt like, not as to your point earlier, the prosecution didn't present all the evidence. It seems like some things were held back. I know that the defense tried to put forth this whole Odinism aspect. The judge is the one who said, no, we're not going to go there. So I go back to the same thing you do, that balance of the scales of justice. As a journalist, I like to ask more questions than necessarily answer them. I know everybody wants answers, but, and I guess we can Monday morning quarterback this thing all we want. We're not on the jury and they haven't rendered their decision yet. There's so much to this. I know a lot of people, and I'm seeing in chat all your comments and what you guys think. Just going through this, you've got some very convincing, as you say, circumstantial evidence. You've got the interview with Alan with police, and you've got his statements to police, which absolutely have to be weighed in the balance here. Just going back to the bridge guy, I mean, people have different opinions on that, but when Alan was asked what he was wearing that day, he gave a description that does match the clothing that we see in bridge guy. The blue jeans, this heavy Carhartt jacket, the tennis shoes, the military style combat boots, So those were some things that came out. And of course, his own statements, right? I can totally see how people in general can think, oh, well, if the guy is confessing, well, then of course he played a role if he's not, the one completely responsible for this. So I can totally see, the emotion that people have with that. Again, I go back to the physical evidence and what was presented to the jury and what we were able to glean from that. And, I think that has to weigh heavily the most. But of course, the jury's taking every aspect into consideration, including his confessions. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's go back and think through, some of the other things, right? Let's put bridge guy on this bridge that day. Okay. So why is he there? Is he out just taking a walk? Does he know they're going to be there? Right? Those are questions that you have to ask ourselves. We have to ask ourselves. Okay. So now bridge guy's there and he sees these two girls, teenage girls. Are they his target set? Meaning, why is he going to select them? What is the reason, his motive? What's his What's his motive for selecting these two girls? It's easy to say SA, just like that. Okay. But the girls don't know if he's there to rob them, if he's there to kidnap them, if he's there to essay them on the spot. What's going on there? Okay. So now, bridge guy makes the move down the hill. Gun in play. Gun that he came to the bridge with. And knife or box cutter, whatever it's going to be, okay, with a serrated edge on it, according to testimony. Okay. That means he takes his box cutter from work, puts it in his pocket, gets his gun, and he's going to go to the bridge because they're going to be there, hypothetically. All right, let's fast forward. He's got them. Now, almost immediately, he's got their clothes off of probably both girls. But he leaves one of them naked. Why? So now think about this. You have one who you've demanded disrobe. You have the second one who you have demanded disrobe. And you put her clothes on. Right? Why is that happening? I have my theories, and they're just theories, but I would have submitted it to the investigative team. And so now he's got one clothed, one unclothed. Now the question is, at what time does he, in the middle of this, decide, you know what? I need to kill them. I need to take their life. Okay. An organized offender who wakes up in the morning, let's use Wesley Allen Dodd. If you want to see how he operates, I put some of the interviews I did with him on my playlist. Dodd woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to go kill kids today. And he did just that. Okay. So now, is this that kind of guy? Or is this the pharmacist / photo guy, whatever he is, who's decided today's the day to take this fantasy that has been going for years. This just doesn't happen. This fantasy's been moving and operating for years up here. And now the perfect opportunity presents itself, and I'm ready for it. I've got my gun. I've got my knife. I've got the location. I've got a getaway plan. All of this stuff, and this plan is going to be executed to the point where the cops are going to have no idea, none, zero, zilch, that I'm right here in the community. And when I do it, I'm not going to do it again. I have fulfilled the fantasy. I am satisfied. I am moving on. Okay.
So nothing before and nothing after.
Correct.
And
right.
What we know from studying these type of personalities, very rare if that's going to happen. There's always a history. There's always something previous. And if they're not caught, something post. So it's not fitting from what you're saying.
There are
doesn't fit.
And thousands of studies and thousands of daily interviews going on in state prisons right now with these guys. And they're asking the same questions. How long did it take for you to get there? What was it? Ted Bundy talked about how to catch the Green River Killer. The behavior science unit went to Ted Bundy and says, hey, we got all these murders up in Washington. Got any ideas? And he gave them ideas on how to catch, the Green River Killer, because that's how they understood each other. It's like two football teams. Okay, we understand the play. But in this is kind of a one-off. That's why this has been such a mystery. It's kind of a one-off. Okay. And in the middle of all of this, you end up getting this Klein guy who you go, wow, that's interesting. He's got all the CP. He's got all of the, the catfish. He's got the fake, profile. The girls are communicating with him. And then you've got this other guy, Ron Logan, who you look at him and you go, let me get this right. This is 1,400 feet from your property. There's a lot of history and a background with him that people go, well, that's weird. And then you have this animal hair that comes into play. And you go, well, that's weird. Where'd that come from? Okay. And so let's go back to now where he's down the hill and this is starting to unfold. Okay. The fantasy is unfolding. And by the way, these individuals do not expect things to go exactly right. But typically 90% of the time, they don't expect things to go wrong. Okay? Because if you have two victims and you kill both victims, now you don't realize what you have to do once you have both of these bodies. And I want to be sensitive to the family and to the victims here, but at the same time, I want to be real and talk about what the suspect is processing. Because once they kill them, they don't realize, and I think we have evidence of this, what do I do now? Do I cover this body with branches? Do I drag this body, over here? Do I pick up the clothing and throw it in the river and then, escape that way? Okay. What do I do here? Okay. They don't process that. They learn that. They learn that over time and experience, i.e. serial offenders. Okay. But an offender who, let's say, is kidnapping a child to essay them, they don't anticipate what the next level is going to be. They get to that point. So sometimes they say, if you tell anybody, and they use the threats of intimidation and, coercion and that kind of problem. And then they gradually, migrate towards, I'll kill you and I'll kill your family. And then it just keeps getting worse and worse. And they eventually, their fantasy gets to the place where they go, I can't have any witnesses. I have to eliminate my witnesses. But there's a track record for them to get there. Typically, an investigation can go back and find that track record. So now he has them under the bridge with a gun and a knife. Why does the suspect change the weapons. What's going on? Wouldn't it be easier just to say, you're going to do everything I want you to do, or I'll kill you? I'll shoot you with this gun? Or just imply that? What's going on? Okay. Why is this guy now saying, okay, time for the knife, i.e. the box cutter, whatever it's going to be? That means he loses more control. It's a risk the suspect is taking that both of the girls won't turn on him and fight or run, escape. Sometimes clothing, remove the clothing, you depersonalize the victim instantly. And so they hesitate. Okay. But in this situation, he knew, okay, I got to move. We're moving. Let's go. Move. And let's move. Let's go. Okay. One of the things I thought was very interesting, the testimony that came out that there was blood on the shoe belonging to Abby, on the tongue of the shoe, okay, the top. And then there was testimony, it's possible that the girls were moved. Is it possible? This is just a theory. I am not saying this is what happened. Is it possible that the suspect forced Abby to participate in moving Libby and pulling her after he starts to execute her at the tree? There's evidence possibly that she was attempting possibly to be gagged and or restrained on the mouth.
That's Abby you're referring to.
Abby.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Now, that in of itself, and we have to ask ourselves, hey, there is, why is the suspect moving Libby one direction, i.e., she's the first one to be killed, and Abby another direction? Why is this happening? Is there an intent to remove her, Abby, from the area? And if so, why? And this is just a question. Is that a possible scenario here? And so then you have to ask yourself the other side of that coin. If so, where are they going? What is the intent? To remove one and leave the other. And so Libby is moved away out of, from where she was. It looks like she may have moved herself a little bit, and then, the suspect moved her over. Is it possible that the gun comes into play again at that point? I mean, we could go on all day long and speculate, but I'm just thinking like an investigator standing there at the crime scene going, okay, well, why do we have this over here? Why do we have that over here? We know about the blood transfer up on the tree. Why is there blood transfer above the other blood transfer, the further one, right? Everybody said that it was an F, but the blood spatter analysis guy came back and said, no, it's just transfer. Okay. But he couldn't explain why there was blood on the tongue of Abby's shoe. And so I started thinking through that, and I came up with the thought process. Could he have forced her to help move and terrorize this victim by terrorizing her to participate in moving her girlfriend with the intent of taking her, Abby, off site. And that's where the gagging, and that wasn't going to play. And she, takes off maybe 10, 15 feet, and he chases her down and cuts her. And then she drops, and the positioning of however her poor body was, her head positioning could cause a flow away from the clothing. Okay, you may get something underneath, but it's not necessarily that you're going to get it all over the front. Okay. And there's no indication that I heard of any evidence of, arterial, carotid or anything to that effect. And I don't think the autopsy and the test showed, meaning, the autopsy.
The blood spatter expert, I believe, was the one who said the girls probably bled out in 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
That was their testimony.
Yeah. So that means, and then the question has to be, okay, at what point did the knife again come into play? Okay. And then the question has to be, who is the first one? Because you can't have them simultaneously unless you have multiple people involved. One guy can control 2 young teenage girls, no problem, with a gun. Not an issue. Very easy. Very easy. But it's much more difficult to control 2 teenage girls, especially one who's a little street smart, like Libby, who is saying, gun. And then, the girls are filming their killer, potentially. Bridge guy. The girls started this whole, that was a gift to the investigators, that these poor children had to even get this guy on video. Okay. But here's the thought. Now that we've got this, then we've got to just stay with the fundamentals, basics. Don't go down 100 rabbit holes. Okay? Don't go down into the Masonic, movement on the top of the head and, all this other stuff. Is that a possibility? I have no idea. Okay, but that's not the evidence in the court of law currently. The evidence in the court of law currently, which this jury is, they're trying to decide, is this the right guy? And man, that is a very, very difficult decision right now based on what evidence has been presented. It's a difficult decision.
And I think that's why we're seeing it's taking multiple days. They're not rushing into a verdict. They're taking their time. I can only imagine being a fly on the wall in the room of the conversations and the arguments and what about this? What about that? And they know they have to get it right.
Yeah. Better them than us, right?
Heck yeah.
And having to be on that jury. Because we've seen cases like this before. Extremely high profile cases. And, when you think about the totality of this, once the suspect now has executed, and this is what this is an execution of both girls. This is not a just because we have there's evidence that Libby, okay, she's not completely violated. What I mean by that is SA. A suspect at a sadistic level, okay, is going to really play this out as far as they can get it. Okay? And we don't have evidence of that. The bodies don't have evidence of that. Is there the ME says we took a kit, right? And we examined it, and we can't, say for sure, but we can also say we can't say that SA occurred. Right? Somebody who, again, we go back to the DNA. Let's talk about the DNA for a moment. Okay. The DNA is all over the place. There's, the sisters, which makes sense because she borrowed her sister's, hoodie.
Well, wait, you're referring to the hairs found in Abby's hand
Hairs.
that were tested and found to be
Kelsey's.
That's Libby's older sister.
Right.
Okay, I just want to be very clear about what
which is not
about.
uncommon, not right?
Not uncommon.
You would expect that. Okay. You had 4 females and 1 male in terms of hair. Okay. I think you also have a cross mixture of blood where, you have Kelsey's, or excuse me, you have Libby's and you have Abby's, cross mixture on Libby's, or excuse me, Abby's body. Okay. But that goes back to the shoe theory. Does the suspect tell her, help me, pointing the gun and grabbing the two of them, her in pure panic, okay, to pull hell. I mean, it's just a theory, but that would explain potentially how there could be blood transfer on her shoes, okay, from Libby. Okay. On that tongue of the shoe, I would have to look at a lot of photographs to come to just a further thought process. Not necessarily it's the right one, but it certainly could be in play. I've had cases where the suspect has had multiple victims, and the suspect said, he kills one in front of the other and then says to the victim, help me move this body. And they force them to do it. So it's not uncommon. Okay. And one of the cases I want to talk about are these 2 young boys here. This was in San Diego. And Karen, tell everybody who we're looking at here.
So maybe some of you remember this heartbreaking, horrific case. It's from 1993. This is 2 friends, Jonathan Sellers and Charlie Keever. Charlie is on the left and Jonathan Sellers is on the right. And this case, when I heard about the Delphi case years ago, I first thought of the Sellers case, this case. So these were 2 friends, these 2 little boys. Jonathan Sellers was 9 and Charlie was 13. So there was a bit of an age gap there. But anyway, they were friends. They were out riding their bikes on a sunny day. And this happened in South Bay, San Diego. They were abducted and they were killed. And this happened March 27th, 1993. So this case, the details of this case are really horrific. The boys, they were violently essayed and there was torture. We're not getting into those details. But here's the interesting part about this case. If you think about the Delphi case, it was more than 8 years later in 2001, where San Diego Police Department and their cold case group went back and they tested the DNA that they had from Jonathan Sellers and Charlie Keever's case. Now, just a few facts before we give that away. So the boys, they were out riding their bikes and their bodies were found together like the next day. And again, I'm not going to go into all the horrific crime scene things. You guys can Google it if you are interested in reading those kind of details. Both boys were found, their bodies were found, they were naked from the waist down, and there was staging involved. Jonathan, the younger one, was found hanging from a tree, and the older boy was on the ground. So they were both staged. Okay. So this was a cold case. They had thank goodness they had DNA from the crime scene, but it was in 1993. I think they tested what they could. This case sat for 8 years. These poor families, I just remember the mothers, each of their mothers were on TV news often, and just the anguish and the heartbreak and not knowing who the killer was for 8 years wreaked havoc on this community. So again, as I said, 8 years later, 2001, police go back, they test the DNA that they had. And sure enough, then let me tell you where they found the DNA. So some DNA came from Charlie's body. I'm going to leave it at that. He's the younger boy. So they actually had the killer's DNA. And hang on, Chris. And then they had DNA on 2 cigarette butts that were found at the crime scene. Dropped and left at the crime scene. So they test this again, and instantly, in CODIS, there was a hit, and it came up on a convicted rapist named Scott Erskine. You can show the picture if you want, if we need to. Anyway, this guy, this is your suspect. Thank goodness we have CODIS, because that's where they got the hit 8 years later. This guy has a long and extremely violent history of SA kidnapping and murder. Okay, so they got him on the DNA. Now, listen, what happened during the trial? Okay, so jurors were shown the horrific crime scene photos. And so the jury, this is back in 2003. So the jury found this guy guilty of murder, but they couldn't agree on the sentence. 11 jurors voted for the death penalty. 1 wanted life without parole. So there was a mistrial on the death penalty phase of this guy, of his trial. So what happened? A year later, there's a second jury that they went through the trial again, and a second jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for this guy. P.S. He was sent to death row where he belonged. And in 2020, so he served about 16 years in prison. This guy died in prison. They said complications related to COVID. Doesn't matter. They got their guy. They're the right guy, death row. They got him. They got him on DNA. And did he have ties to that community? Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
And he was out hunting that day when he saw these 2 boys on their bicycles.
Yes.
So again, I just go back to obviously the value of DNA in these cases, these horrific cases.
So,
And
let's talk about Erskine just for a second. Okay. Just for a second. Why are we even bringing up, this comparative analysis, right? We're not saying it's exactly the same, but we're saying that, look, when you take a look at this guy and you say to yourself, okay, what is he doing? Right? And we figure, right? You say, well, he's out hunting 2 boys, one 13-year-old and one 9-year-old. Okay. And we ask ourselves then, okay, why is he out hunting these boys? Why is this occurring? And now we apply that same logic to this trial and this case. Why is Bridge Guy hunting 2 young girls, 2 children. What is going on up here? And so now when you do what you do a suspectology and you start looking at his background, and then you start looking at the background of R.A., Richard Allen, or Keenan, or Ron Logan, any of the names that came up where the PD was focusing, and you discover a guy like this had, frontal, lobe injuries from a car accident as a young child. He was in a coma. He molested his neighbors. He, he AR'd kids in his neighborhood, boys. He AR'd girls in his neighborhood as a teenager. And then eventually you see this pattern of behavior start to progress to the point where he decides, I'm going to go to the next level. I'm going to go hunting. Right. One of the things that has bothered me about the Delphi case is this guy standing there, and this is not him. This is just a photo I found. Is he the same mentality as Erskine and others like him? That he wakes up in the morning and decides, today is the day. Is the day that we're going to make the move. Is it possible? Of course it is. Of course it is. But that means you have to, as an investigator and as an investigative team, you have to eliminate every other possibility. And when we hear that there was infighting going on, that is an indication of lack of experience. And when you have people that come into the investigation and say, look, here's what we've seen in the past, not any, the card team and, the behavior science unit and the FBI and a variety of other organizations, they can come in, and ISP says, well, we're not interested in your opinion. Okay. Well, rule number 1 in any type of investigation, it's not your investigation. It belongs to the children. It's your responsibility to tell their story. And to tell it without an emotional connection. Karen will tell you, I've had many cases where I've told people on our team, I don't want to talk to the family right now. To this day, even Matthew Checky's mom, I've only given her a hug after the trial. I didn't talk to her one time while I was investigating her son's murder, because I didn't want that to get caught into that emotional circle. Okay. And one of the things, I got to be honest with you, when I saw whoever the colonel or whatever the general, whatever the guy is, gets up in these press conferences and he's talking to the suspect through the press and telling the public that you could be in this room. We know who you are. We're coming. Okay. And then, kind of, it's the emotional push. Okay. That's how investigators get in trouble. That's how you get a Richard Tuitt, where you say, okay, that's fine. He's got 3 centimeters of blood on his sweater, but we have this guy, the criminalist, who says he cross-contaminated it. Are we going to tell the public about that, or what are we going to do? Okay. No, we got the right guy. Well, wait a minute. What about this guy? His name was George Durgan, by the way. Great guy. And he testified. Okay. He testified about it. But these are the kind of things where you get this, situation where you go, well, wait a minute. I want to be objective here. It's my responsibility to be objective to make sure we get the right guy. And then you have a lab technician testify that they still have evidence they have not tested.
That kind of blew my mind a bit. Why wouldn't you wait to trial to have everything tested, right? And I appreciate the fact that they said, hey, we're not all done with this, but doesn't that leave the door wide open with obvious questions?
You've got a guy on trial and you have a criminalist who says, well, we didn't test it. We didn't test that. The first thing the defense is going to say is, why not? Now, if you've tested similar and this is just an abundance, like let's say you had, 50 swabs of blood from the same blood spot, right? And you've taken 50 swabs out of that blood stain, and, you're on the stand and they ask you, did you test all of them? Well, no, but I tested, 4 out of the same blood stain. Yes. Remember in OJ's trial? What about that, Mr. Fong? Barry Scheck? Barry Scheck asked him, how many times did you change your gloves? How many times did you do this? How many times you do that? Remember the blood on the door handle that came back positive for both, Nicole and Goldman? It was a positive mix of both of them. And Barry Scheck asked him, the criminalist, Fong, he said, well, did you test all of it? Well, no, we only tested, 1. He said, but you had 10. Yes. Well, why didn't you test 2? Well, we thought it was only necessary to test the 1. Okay, fine. From that spot. But now in this situation, they're saying they have hair still. Is that my understanding? Is that correct? And the criminalist said, well, yeah, but we haven't checked all of that in case we need it for later. And the defense said, well, this is later. We have a guy on trial. Why isn't this occurring? Okay. What? 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 You just go, okay. What are they going to do? After they convict him, they're going to have another, testing period. And hypothetically, what if it does come back somebody else? Hypothetically, we don't know. That's a jury's decision right now. And thank you, Cat's Pajamas. I love it. Thank you for your kindness. And I'm not saying they're wrong. And he admitted it 61 times. Yeah, that's a very difficult situation. But we also have to weigh out, and I'm just being honest, does he have a psychological problem? Because this kind of crime is it seems like there's a little organization, but there's more disorganization to it. The fact that there are two weapons involved in this thing. The fact that one kid is told to put the other kid's clothing on. Isn't that odd? Isn't that kind of like out there? The fact there's, the gun is used to control, hey, gun, but then the gun's not used to kill. A box cutter, a knife is used to kill. Okay. But then there's not any real evidence that he took his time. He had time. He had time to change clothing of these kids. So the time was there for the suspect. The time was available for this suspect. So why not take advantage of the time? Why all of a sudden do you now decide I have to kill not only her, I have to kill her? Or did I kill them both? In the Sellers case, he not only killed the boys, but he molested them. He took the time to molest them. He had them molest him before he killed them. And the list goes on. And then he, believe it or not, in that particular case, and Karen didn't want to, we're not going to go into the details, but it's a horrific case where even one of the staging is so horrific. This isn't staging. There was kind of, positioning of the bodies and moving the bodies and throwing branches on the body, a 7-foot branch or whatever it is on top of the body. That's not staging. That is concealing the body.
And it really wasn't heavy duty concealing. I mean, it was like everyone described it as sticks on the body. If you want to conceal, you're going to put leaves, you're going to act, whatever. There's real concealment. So that part always seemed like partial, not quite concealment, something like that.
Yeah, that's more indication of personalization to the victim. That there, is a connection to the community. There's a connection to the victim, a knife is very personal. Okay, very personal. But the neck, remember, if somebody's cutting the neck multiple times, that means they haven't done it a lot. Okay, meaning it's almost amateurish. They haven't, had the skill set. And then you see that, it was applied 4 or 5 times on poor Libby to the neck. It's as if, it wasn't working. Well, it wasn't work. Well, then just take your gun and shoot her. Get it over with. Okay. That's more indicative of the victim going like this and trying to stop and fighting, and the suspect trying to control the victim. Okay. These guys that do this, specifically, like, okay, today's the day, this is on. We're making this happen. Okay. Where I just lectured 200 law enforcement officers in North Carolina, I would have this conversation with them and say, look, what tree are you looking up right now? Because the guy you're playing with here is kind of an amateur. Okay. But at the same time, is he trying to take one of the victims away, i.e. Abby? He's really not interested in Libby, so he kills her first, get her out of the way, uses Libby against Abby psychologically, terror, pure terror. We can't even comprehend what that must have felt like. But he uses her as a tool. You're going to wear her clothes. Can you imagine the fear going on in this poor child? The youngest? You're going to wear your friend's clothes, who you just saw me kill. And you're going to help me move her. Because, Abby's sitting there, unclothed. She starts to pass out because she's losing blood. And there was blood on her legs, which is indicative of her body starting to move and roll. Okay. And then eventually she's moved a little bit more, or she tries to get up and move a little more. Then the suspect moves her a little bit further back from that. And then Abby falls and he pulls her away. And there's 20 feet separating them with a round in between them. Okay. The gun was a control mechanism. It went from, if he's our guy, crack, crack. Okay, you're going to do exactly as I tell you. Let's go. We're starting. Take your clothes off. You, both of you. Let's go. You are going to wear her clothes. Put them on. Let's go. But before I do that, I'm going to start stabbing her. Get up against the tree. Blah, blah, blah. Hypothetical, right? Maybe that's a reality. I don't know. All of this evidence that came out with the crime scene, we should have heard from somebody that day at that crime scene. Did they have testimony from that day?
What do you mean, heard from somebody, a witness?
An investigator that laid it out the way this other guy did when he saw the photographs, 2024. Okay, so we had Matt. Am I saying Abby dressed herself in Libby's clothes? Doesn't she have Libby's clothing on?
She was found with Libby's clothes on, yes.
Multiple.
So I think the question is, Bogey, tell me if this is what you're thinking. The question is, did the killer redress Abby versus Chris's theory that at gunpoint the killer had Libby take off her clothes and Abby put them on? I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I think that's what you mean, but I don't want to assume that.
Yeah, my thought process initially was, and I said this, I think 2.5 years ago. It's on one of my first videos that I did on this case. My thinking was, I know everybody's thinking that Libby was a target, was the choice target because she's naked. Okay. I think it was Abby. I think the suspect wanted to remove her from that area. Okay. And that's why there was evidence of, something trying to cover her mouth, not as many wounds to the neck. She's smaller. She's much easier to move. And so Libby is in the way of Abby. And so he has to eliminate Libby first. And that's why he's using the fear of this. This is why he's thinking, you know what, I can use this, i.e., watching her girlfriend and the fear and the terror and the emotional trauma of watching him kill her in front of her. But you see, what I think may have happened is he has her either almost immediately after he cuts her, redresses, or he has her when she's down in Libby's clothing, and he kills her when she's probably trying to escape. And that explains none of the blood spatter or blood evidence on the front of the clothing from her neck wound, because it's kind of a post thought process for the suspect. He's probably not anticipating a fight. The fear of just the totality of the circumstances put that child into freezing. I talked to Dodd one time, and I asked Dodd, I said, how in the world did you control your victims? And he just looked at me and he said, that was easy. I said, what do you mean? He said, they revert back to a childlike state with pure fear internally, their emotional state. They freeze. He says, and you can have all day with them. I said, interesting. Interesting. So if you think about, that's how these guys process. Think about somebody that has been essaying children for, let's say, 10 years, and they've never been caught. How do they keep those children locked into this state of fear? Well, it's through power and control and total intimidation. And sometimes that fear, those mechanisms are, I'll kill your family, I'll kill your dog, your cat, whatever, right? And all of these things play. And so in this situation, you know, Libby's just out for a walk with Abby. They're just out for a walk. But there's evidence Klein may have pulled them there. I did a whole program on Klein and Ron Logan early on in this thing. Richard Allen wasn't even on the radar at that point. They weren't going that way in any way, shape, or form. They have the shell case, they have the bullet, and they're saying, yeah, it's consistent with this 6-hour 226. Well, how many bullets could be consistent with that gun? That's very thin evidence, in my opinion. I mean, in working over 300 murders in my career, I wouldn't hang my hat on just that bullet, personally.
So just a pedestrian question, could that bullet possibly come from somebody else's gun?
I don't know. I haven't seen the ballistics reports, but is it possible? Yeah. Police carry 226s. That's their service weapons. A lot of agencies, I carried a 226. It's a very reliable weapon. So is that possible? Of course, anything is possible. And that's why this jury has a difficult task. So then you say, okay, what's the next biggest piece of evidence that we're going to go after, right? In today's world, well, technology, you want to get a digital footprint. Okay, do we have technology that's putting them there? And the answer, yeah, I was down there. He says I was down there. Okay, they have some technology that says, okay, look, we got a ping here. Okay. But they got other people there too. So you got to eliminate them. You got to say 100%. You've got Ron Logan. His ping is outside of his house on his property. You just can't dismiss that. You have to be able to say, Ron, why is your phone outside when you said you weren't even here? You see, the geofencing part of this thing is huge because it can put you in the circle or out of the circle. Either way. Okay. I just helped. Well, I can't say it, but those are the kind of things where you go, okay, so why is this here? And is this exculpatory to something else? Does this take us into a different direction? And if the answer is yes, or the answer is no, then what you do is, you have in your war room, you have, A, B, and C. A is the strongest, B is kind of strong, and C, we'll kind of keep it there. Okay. But this would go in the C column for me. Because unless you can show 100%, it would have been better if he would have fired the gun, because then you could definitively say, yeah, there's no question that that firing pin matched the discharge on this shell casing. No question about it. And the ejection port, you can say, well, it's consistent. And that's always what the jury hears. And that's what the defense will pound on. And that's what they did pound on. It was consistent, but can you say it came from that gun? And the expert had to say, well, it's consistent with that gun. I mean, I've heard that 100 times, 1,000 times. Okay. But now you go back and you say, well, okay, if it's consistent, then you have to retrace that gun. You have to say, okay, when did he buy it? What were his habit patterns with that gun, et cetera? And you got to keep going down that. You got to keep going down that that route, right? Yeah, there was, and Mom, 23 Kittens, there was evidence of that. Yes, there was. That he was involved in many DV problems. Thank you. I'm just glad I'm not one of the jurors. I really am. This is a difficult task. What do you guys think? I hope you guys aren't blaming the whole state of Indiana for Delphi. No, no, not at all. We're just trying to be down the middle here, because that's what the jury was told after they looked at the evidence.
I feel like we're asking the obvious common sense questions based on what's come out during the trial. We're trying to think like an average juror would be thinking right about now.
So here's the deal on a poll. On my side over here, I don't have the ability through StreamYard to put a poll up.
I think we would have had to do it at the start of this live before it's underway, is my understanding. I think once we're underway, I don't think we have a way through StreamYard to do that.
Yeah.
But we could put something up on our community page afterwards. This evening we could do that.
Yeah, we could do that. That's a great idea. And Miss Corgi, such a sad story all the way around. We completely agree. And I think this, well, we'll know over the next couple of days, and when the jury comes back, we're gonna jump on that and we'll talk about it. Teresa, doesn't she always have the best ideas?
You're so sweet, Teresa.
She's the smart one and everybody. I always tell people I'm just Karen's husband, because she's such a bright light in the world and in my life and our family's life. She's just an amazing human being. What do you think the blood was running up the chin? Is there a cause for this besides them being upside down? I think if she had to be alive, number one, for the blood to move. Okay. So, and if she was, positioned this way, then the blood would move this way. And if she moved back, then the blood potentially, eventually if she passed out from loss of blood, the blood could run the opposite direction. So you can actually get blood moving in both directions. But the first indicator of that was they're typically with us. And then when they either pass out and or the heart stops, then it could go the opposite direction. I hope that answers your question, Hope. Let's see, what else are you guys thinking here? Was blood running up her face? I don't know about that, but no, but there was indication based on the testimony that she was alive and bleeding. And I believe that's Abby. The ground was not messed up around the girls. Body of one person. Ground was not messed up around the girl's body of one person. Is it possible that one could pull this off? It's always possible, remember, right? Is it, I think some of the mystery was that blood on the shoe of Libby, the top of the shoe. I think there was testimony that the blood spatter expert could not explain exactly how he believed that could have occurred.
Well, and then also, as somebody mentioned in chat, there was testimony that blood was found under both girls on the ground, like underneath their bodies.
Have I seen similar staging? I have seen many body dumps in the fields. I've seen in strawberry fields, in the woods. We had a case where a wife had put a hit on her husband, and she hired, believe it or not, a couple of Marines. It was called the Trione murder. And she said she had a flat tire. And the husband showed up to change the flat tire. And there were people in the brush waiting for him. And they executed him. And they made it look like it was an automobile, accident type of thing. And she blah, blah, blah. But that was a pretty good staged event. Our guys worked that. I've seen, guys and gals. I had a prostitute working the strawberry fields one night. She was murdered by some illegal immigrants, and they staged her body underneath a mattress in a kind of like a Quonset hut. But you see, I don't see this as being totally staged with these two girls. I see this more of a concealment situation. I see that, yes, he moved their bodies, okay, but that is even more so leaning behaviorally towards somebody that's not all the cylinders clicking at the same time, and it's a panic scenario. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean they planned on doing that. Okay. I'm still not personally buying, that this is an organized, group that decided, okay, let's go ahead and sacrifice, these two girls to, a Greek, Viking god or whatever the situation is, an Odinism. I think that's a long run of, man, there'd have to be a lot of people involved in that. And killers like this that kill children, they usually don't like to go around and advertise that it happened. I.e., one person, two people, maybe, long run. What's the old saying? Loose lips sink ships. Betty Broderick, love it. Yeah, that's right. Mark Patine was the case was the DA on Betty's case. Yeah, burned the
I was
house.
working at the LA Times at the, when she killed Dan and his new wife. I was actually an intern at the LA Times, and there was a hotshot new reporter. She graduated from an Ivy League school. She was there, and she covered the Betty Broderick case. And I was still in college, actually, way back then. And she went on to, she wrote, I think, one of the scripts for either one of the movie, like a TV movie of Betty Broderick. You know, that case was so, it took over the media. I mean, it was insane in Southern California at that
That
time.
was a huge case.
And as we mentioned, not to like mix cases here, but Betty Broderick case was like 2-3 months after the Menendez brothers shot and killed their parents, all in Southern California. So it was quite an interesting couple of months there back in 1989.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a nut. I think she's still a nut. Betty's
Yeah.
still a nut. I think it's safe to say she's, life without parole, and she's in her 70s now.
Yeah, that elevator doesn't go to the top floor. That's for sure. Well, Karen, you and you guys, so you know, she covered a lot of cool cases back in the day. But I remember with Mark, I was at lunch with him, and he was the DA who prosecuted her, and he told me all the inside story on that one. Man, she was not wrapped real tight at all. And hopefully we got another crazy case out of San Diego, Larry Miliete and Maya, right? I mean, we've got that coming up. We should get hold of Richard and Mary Chris and have them on and get an update on them.
We'll need to do an update. So that case, there's hearings. It's winding its way through the judicial system in San Diego County. Trial is still a ways off. But yeah, we'd love to have Mary, Chris, and Richard on just to get an update and see how things are going.
Exactly. And thank you. Karen does. My sweetheart has been there, done that. She's been investigative journalist over 30 years in the game, and started off at the LA Times, ended up, pulling stories. Tell them about the time you got into, well, never mind. That's another
Hang
day.
on. So I just want under your scars, I think that's what she said. So Chris was on Court TV on that same segment with Vinny Politan a few days ago that Mary, Chris, and Richard were talking about the Maya Miliete case. Yes.
Yeah.
They were on Court TV. That they were on a different segment, but Chris was on as well. So yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. You guys are so sweet.
She wants to represent her.
Yeah, Kathy, we saw that. Boy, that's going to be a stopper on that one.
You think that Looney Tune will have a chance? What do you guys think there? Anybody want to put a bag of donuts on Looney Tune Lori and the shot there? The problem that she's going to have there, outside the fact that she, had him whacked inside the living room, is, one of the biggest, well, I can see her going out there and just saying, hey, I had nothing to do with this, yada, yada. But Colby, I mean, her son.
The whole thing. I tell you what, though, Lori Vallow is going to be tried in Maricopa County. Hate to say it, there is a difference between Idaho and Maricopa County. There really is. So it'll be interesting. Maricopa County has had volume for decades. Am I right, Chris?
Volume.
Yes.
Yeah. We just did a class recently when we had two guys from Tucson in the class, Tucson homicide. And I asked him, I said, how many cold cases do you guys have? Do you know what the answer was, Karen? I don't think I told you this.
I have no idea.
400.
400 from how many years back?
Just going back 400.
Like 20 years, 30 years?
Once I heard the number, I didn't even ask him. I just said, "You got to
Wow.
be kidding me." So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
talk
crazy.
about volume. Turn up the volume. That is a lot. Well,
Yeah.
we would not be showing our respect unless we showed them and said thank you to the Marine Corps. Today is your birthday. And of course, you started early for tomorrow, veterans. We love our veterans. We thank you for your service. We are so grateful to each and every one of you, and our Navy, Army, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Air Force. We are so grateful for our freedoms because of each and every one of you who have served. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my mom and my dad, who are both Marines. And this is just a brief 1-second clip of my father's funeral in Arlington National Cemetery. My family got a phone call from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, who honored my father with the president's own band. And I grew up, and this is probably the way I am, or why I am, how I am, and Karen knows. I grew up with 2 Marines. My mom got out of the Marine Corps and married my father after he came back from the Chosin Reservoir in 1950 or 51. He was there in 50. He fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And I remember watching him leave as a young boy and him telling my brother and I, "Take care of your mom." But my mother was tough as nails because she was also, like I said, a woman Marine. So I'm going to just show you a brief clip of my father's funeral in Arlington. And Karen and I, on behalf of our family, we thank you, Marines. Happy birthday. And tomorrow we thank our veterans. We're so
All of our
grateful.
veterans. Yes.
All of our veterans. Every one of you. We love you and we thank you for everything. And then we're going to go to Hawaii.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a way.